So here we are over in Illustrator. Now this is not going to be a big Illustrator tutorial. You're going to have to learn that somewhere else. But I just wanted to show you some of the basic ideas here. I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm going to open up that PDF file that we just saved. That's the one that we saved out from SOLIDWORKS. And it's going to warn me that I don't have one of the fonts that I need and whatever. But it is going to bring this thing in. And importantly, notice we do have those origin points in here. They're a little bit hard to see, but they are there. They're just kind of small. And that's going to be helpful to us because we're going to need those for registration. So let's select all of this stuff, first of all, and just group it. That's what I like to do. Control-G to group that. And then I'll go over to the Transparency tab, and I'm just going to drop that transparency down to, say, 50%, so it's just not quite so visually obtrusive on my screen. I'll rename this my Drawing layer, and lock that layer down so I can't accidentally make any changes to it. Then I'll make a new layer, and we'll call this our Graphics layer. And it turns out that I actually already have the graphics designed for this, and they are on my clipboard. I'm going to Control-V to paste them in here. And then I'm going to position them where I think they should go. And so let's select all there, and then I'll just drag these up to where I think they're in approximately the right spot. Now let's pretend for a second that we've used our graphic design department and they've spent a lot of time nailing this stuff down to exactly where they want it. They know that they zoomed in and kind of eyeballed this stuff around, and they know that it's just where they want it to be. But we want to make sure that we're able to align this stuff in SOLIDWORKS the same way that it's aligned here in Illustrator, right? Because they've gone through the work of aligning this stuff. We don't want to have to redo that work. Also, we have different pieces of geometry here. For example, we have on our Magnanimous Dan logo, our fictitious brand name that we're using, we have to register this outer text with the inner text. Those things need to be in exactly the right spot relative to one another. Otherwise, things are going to be really obviously wrong. And so that's where registration marks come in, and this is a really important thing that most people don't think about. And that's why we have our origin points visible. So before we export anything, we're going to grab the line tool right here in Illustrator, and I'm just going to draw two lines. One line vertically from the origin, and the other line horizontally from the origin. I'll select both of those lines, and I want to give them a black stroke. But then in the stroke properties for this, I'm actually going to set this to a dashed line. Now the reason for the dash is because actually when we export this, SOLIDWORKS is going to notice that dash, and it's going to use it to turn these into construction geometry instead of actual geometry, which is just kind of nice. So we have that one. I'm going to group those together, and then I'm going to duplicate those over to the Magnanimous Dan logo. And I'm going to put them, once again, right on top of our origin point. And I can't see the origin point at the moment because the logo is in the way. So I'll just select my logo, get here in my layers. I'm going to hide that logo for the moment. Here's my origin point. I'll take this guy, and I'm going to snap that vertex straight to the origin so I know that it's in exactly the right place. I can show that logo again. And now we are ready to export this thing for use in SOLIDWORKS. And one more thing, by the way, now that we have our registration marks, the only other thing that we need to make sure of is just that everything is joined together properly, okay? So if there are overlapping shapes, look at these guys. For example, when I was creating this, these two shapes are overlapping. Not only that, but the corners are being rounded using a special effect here in Illustrator called Stylize Round Corners. And that is not going to come through in SOLIDWORKS. So what I have to do is select these things that have rounded corners and say Object, Expand Appearance. And that's going to actually turn those rounded corners into actual geometry, basically bakes them down. Also, we have two overlapping shapes, and those are never a good thing in SOLIDWORKS. So we need to select those, go to our Pathfinder palette, and click on Unite. And that's going to bring those together into one giant shape. So that's something that we need to do with all of this stuff. I'll select all of these guys. I'm going to make sure that I go to Object, Expand Appearance, and then with these overlapping shapes, like those and those, I'm going to make sure that we use unite to combine those together. Also, any text that exists in the document needs to be converted into shapes. You see how this is no longer a text layer. I've gone to type and create outlines and use that to create actual geometry for this type instead of type itself, because otherwise it won't work. All right, so with that said, let's jump back over to SOLIDWORKS.